Carnivores. Organisms that eat only organisms other than plants. Vacuole. A membrane-bounded sac within a cell. Ribosomes. Small grain-shaped organelle that produces proteins. Differentiation. Process by which cells become specialized for specific functions. Equilibrium. The state of both sides are balanced. Independent variable. What you choose values for on y-axis. Diffusion. The random motion of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Photosynthesis. Conversion of light energy from the sun into chemical energy. Products of photosynthesis are glucose and oxygen. Turgid. Cell may explode under pressure due to a hypertonic solution. Hypothesis. First part of the scientific method. Dependent variable. What you measure on y-axis. Model. An explanation or representation of something that cannot be seen. Logistic growth. Population growth that is controlled by limited resources. Stroma. The fluid of the chloroplast surrounding the thylakoid membrane. Involved in the synthesis of organic molecules from carbon dioxide and water. Hypertonic solution. A solution in which the concentration of solutes is greater than that of the cell that resides in the solution. Cell membrane. Thin, flexible barrier that surrounds the cell and controls what goes in and out. Found in animal cells. Plasma membrane. The semi-permeable membrane between the contents and either the cell wall or the cell's surroundings. Why are cells so small? Smaller cells have more surface area across which to pass oxygen, nutrients and waste materials. Hypertonic solution. A cell has more solute inside than outside. What makes up the endomembrane system? Nuclear envelope, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, vacuoles and the plasma membrane. Ingestion. Taking in food from the environment. Symbiosis. A close relationship between two or more species where at least one benefits. Metabolism. The sum total of all processes in an organism which convert energy and matter from outside sources and use that energy and matter to sustain the organism's life functions. Inheritance. The process by which physical and biological characteristics are transmitted from the parent to the offspring. Natural selection. Process in which organisms with favorable genes are more likely to survive to reproduce. Example: the idea of blank underscore was first presented by Charles Darwin. Cytoskeleton. Networks of protein fibers that extend through the cell. Cells. Small part of all living things. Cytoplasm. A jelly-like fluid inside the cell in which the organelles are suspended. Autotrophs. Organisms that are able to make their own food. Homeostasis. Maintaining the status quo. Theory. A hypothesis that has been tested with a significant amount of data. Nucleus. The region of a eukaryotic cell that contains the cell's main DNA. Observation. The process of studying of something to gain information. Lysosome. Membrane-enclosed sac of digestive enzymes. Contains chemicals that break down bigger food particles so they can be used in the cell. Also break down used cell parts. The cell's recycling center. pH. A relative measure of the hydrogen-ion concentration within a solution. Latin for probably hydrogens. Sexual reproduction. Reproduction that requires two organisms. Omnivores. Organisms that eat both plants and other organisms. Passive transport. Movement of molecules through the plasma membrane according to the dictates of osmosis or diffusion. Intermediate filaments. Thread-like proteins in the cell's cytoskeleton that are roughly twice as thick as microfilaments. Metabolism. All chemical processes that synthesize or break down materials within an organism. Cytoplasmic streaming. The motion of cytoplasm in a cell that results in a coordinated movement of the cell's contents. Where are ribosomes found? Free-floating in the cytosol, or bound to the rough ER or the nuclear envelope. Producers. organisms that produce their own food. Conclusion. The final ending or idea of a process. Hypothesis. An educated guess that attempts to explain an observation or answer a question. Inference. A conclusion made up of facts and inferring knowledge. Microfilaments. Fine, thread-like proteins found in a cell's cytoskeleton. Mitochondrion. Carries out cellular respiration. Rod-shaped organelle that makes energy for the cell to function with. Converts the energy stored in food to energy the cell can use. Powerhouse of cell. Ecology. The branch of biology that studies the interactions of organisms with one another and with non-living parts of their environment. Metabolism. The chemical processes occurring within a living cell or organism that are necessary for the maintenance of life. Unicellular. Single-celled organism. Experimental design. Experimental design refers to how participants are allocated to the different conditions in an experiment. Molecules. Chemicals that result from atoms linking together. Biology. The study of living organisms and how they function. Chemical change. A change that alters the makeup of the elements or molecules of a substance. Active transport. An active movement where an input of energy is required. Particles move from low concentration to high concentration. Prokaryote. Plant, bacteria or archaea cell. Cell wall. A rigid structure on the outside of certain cells, usually plant and bacteria cells. Organelles. Tiny structures within a cell that carry out specific functions. Vesicle. Sacs made of membranes. Smooth ER. ER that has no ribosomes. Metabolism. All chemical processes that synthesize or break down materials within an organism. Pinocytosis. A form of endocytosis where a cell engulfs liquid into the cell. Rough ER. ER that is dotted with ribosomes. Nuclear envelope. Double membrane enclosing the nucleus. Controls the flow of materials in and out of the nucleus. Chloroplast. Green structure that captures energy from sunlight and changes it to energy that cells can use in making food. Photosynthesis equation. 6CO2 plus 6H2O, greater than light energy, greater than C6H12O6 plus 6O2. Ribosomes. Non-membrane bounded organelles responsible for protein synthesis. Flagella. A projection from a prokaryotic cell that propels it through its liquid environment. Homeostasis. State reaches when each part of the body functions in equilibrium with other parts. Osmosis. The spontaneous movement of molecules through a semi-permeable membrane in order to create equilibrium. Phagocytosis. The process by which a cell engulfs foreign substances or other cells. Hydrophobic. Lacking any affinity to water. Cellulose. A substance that is common in the cell walls of many organisms. Membrane. A thin covering of tissue. Eukaryotic cell. A cell with distinct, membrane-bounded organelles. Chromosomes. Made up of DNA and proteins. Osmosis. A passive movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane. Water moves from an area of low solute concentration to high solute concentration. Mutualism. A relationship between two or more organisms of different species where all benefit from the association. DNA. What is the most common term for the biological polymer found in chromosomes that stores genetic information? Endocytosis. Movement into a cell. Phospholipid bilayer. Thin membrane of lipid molecules. Asexual reproduction. One parent. Anabolism. The sum total of all processes in an organism which use energy and simple chemical building blocks to produce large chemicals and structures necessary for life. Mitochondria. The organelles in which nutrients are converted to energy. Heredity. The genetic transmission of characteristics from parent to offspring. Regulation. Process by which organisms maintain homeostasis, a stable internal environment. Nucleus. Oval-shaped organelle that contains DNA and controls much of the cell's activities by directing protein synthesis. ATP. Main energy source that cells use for most of their work. The energy is stored in ATP until it is released by the reactions remove a phosphate from ATP. A simple way of remembering it is just that it's just energy. Body systems. Sets of organs in our bodies that do the work to keep us healthy and alive. Cellular respiration. C6H1206 greater than CO2 plus H20 plus energy goal is to create ATP occurs in all living things. Hypertonic solution. Higher concentration of solutes outside cell than inside. Organic molecule. A molecule that contains only carbon and any of the following: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and/or phosphorus. Photosynthesis. The process by which green plants and some other organisms use the energy of sunlight and simple chemicals to produce their own food. Genome. The complete genetic material contained in an individual. Endomembrane system. A system of membranes that are specific to a eukaryotic cell. Some are physically connected, while others link when vesicles transfer membrane segments between them. Parasite. An organism that feeds on a living host. Prediction. A statement about the hypothesis. Cellular metabolism. Chemical activities of cells. Gene. Sections of chromosomes made of DNA that code for traits. The basic unit of heredity. Glucose. Another name for sugar. C6H1206. Three things used for making glucose are sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide used for energy and growth. Cytoskeleton. A network of fibers that holds the cell together, helps the cell to keep its shape, and aids in movement. Chromatin. Complex of DNA and proteins that form within the nucleus of eukaryotic cells. Directs the cell's functions. Mutation. An abrupt and marked change in the DNA of an organism compared to that of its parents. Thylakoids. A flattened membrane sac inside the chloroplast, used to convert light energy to chemical energy. X-cell wall. Which of the following is not a structure found in human cells? W. Mitochondrion X-cell wall. Y. Lysosome. Z. Peroxisome. Aerobic organism. An organism that requires oxygen. Plasmodesma. An open channel in the cell wall of a plant through which strands of cytosol connect from an adjacent cell. Reproduction. Producing more cells. Variable. Factors that are kept constant or unchanging. Anaerobic organism. An organism that does not require oxygen. Commensalism. A relationship between two organisms of different species where one benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited. Plant cell. What type of cell is this? Scientific question. Questions that can be answered by using experiments and factual reasoning. Mitochondria. An organelle found in large numbers in most cells, in which the biochemical processes of respiration and energy production occur. Exocytosis. Movement out of a cell. Centriole. Small set of microtubules arranged in a specific way. Lysosome. A vesicle that contains destructive/digestive chemicals. Animal cell. What type of cell is this? Cytology. The study of cells. Cilia. The appendages that propel certain cells. Decomposers. Organisms that break down the dead remains of other organisms. Rough ER. Network of tubular membranes within the cytoplasm of the cell with a rough surface. Helps the ribosomes make proteins, such as insulin. Phase. One of the three forms: solid, liquid, or gas, which every substance is capable of attaining. Cell theory. All living things are composed of cells and all cells come from other cells. Semipermeable membrane. A membrane that allows some molecules to pass through but does not allow other molecules to pass through. Photosynthesis. It is generally believed that most of the oxygen in the air on Earth today came from what general biological process? Element. A collection of atoms that all have the same number of protons. Microorganisms. Living creatures that are too small to see with the naked eye. Sunlight. Main source of energy. Facilitated diffusion. A passive movement of particles from high to low concentration through a protein channel in a cell. Matter. Anything that has mass and takes up space. Cilia. Hair-like projections that extend from the plasma membrane and are used for locomotion. Sexual reproduction. Two parents, male and female. Scientific method. A method of procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. Hypertonic solution. A solution in which the concentration of solutes is less than that of the cell that resides in the solution. Phospholipid. A lipid in which one of the fatty acid molecules has been replaced by a molecule that contains a phosphate group. Active transport. Movement of molecules through the plasma membrane aided by a process that requires energy. Diffusion. The passive movement of particles from an area of high concentration to low concentration. This happens along a concentration gradient. Smooth ER. Network or tubular membranes within the cytoplasm of the cell with a smooth surface. Functions in a variety of different metabolic processes such as synthesis of lipids, oils, phospholipid and steroids. Process drugs, alcohol, and store calcium ions. Chitin. A chemical that provides both toughness and flexibility. Theory. A system of ideas that explains many related observations and is supported by a large body of evidence acquired through scientific investigation. Prokaryotic cell. A cell that has no distinct, membrane-bounded organelles. Plasmolyze. When a cell has shrunk. Plasma. Liquid portion of blood. Physical change. A change that affects the appearance but not the chemical makeup of a substance. Microtubules. Spiral strands of protein molecules that form a tube-like structure. Chloroplast. In what organelle of a plant cell does photosynthesis occur? Nucleolus. Nuclear subdomain that assembles ribosomal subunits in eukaryotic cells. Makes a RNA to form the subunits of ribosomes, which then exit to the cytoplasm. Nuclear membrane. A highly porous membrane that separates the nucleus from the cytoplasm. Atoms. The basic building blocks of matter. Fermentation. The anaerobic breakdown of sugars into smaller molecules. Chloroplast. An organelle containing chlorophyll for photosynthesis. Consumers. Organisms that eat living producers and or other consumers for food. Quantitative observations. Measuring something with numbers. Heredity. The passing of traits from parent to offspring. Example: scientists know that blank can increase chances for certain diseases. Plasmolysis. Collapse of a walled cell's cytoplasm due to a lack of water. Nitrogenous base. Is a carbon ring structure that contains one or more atoms of nitrogen. In DNA, adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. Organs. Made of thousands of cells, connected by several body systems to do work to keep our bodies healthy and alive. Chloroplasts. Qualitative observations. Detailed examination with your senses only. DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid found mainly in the nucleus. Lysosome. The organelle in animal cells responsible for hydrolysis reactions that break down proteins, polysaccharides, disaccharides, and some lipids. Abiogenesis. The idea that long ago, very simple life forms spontaneously appeared through chemical reactions. Cell. What is the basic unit of life? Species. A unit of one or more populations of individuals that can reproduce under normal conditions, produce fertile offspring, and are reproductively isolated from other such units. Central vacuole. A large vacuole that rests at the center of most plant cells and is filled with a solution that contains a high concentration of solutes. Chlorophyll. A pigment necessary for photosynthesis. Organism. Any living thing. Something that meets all criteria of life. Examples so far, we have not found proof of any living blank on another planet. Phagocytosis. A form of endocytosis where a cell engulfs solids into a cell. ATP. Adenine triphosphate, main energy source for cellular work. cristae. Folds in the mitochondria that increase the surface area and therefore its ability to produce ATP. Eukaryote. Animal cell with nucleus. Vacuole. Sac-like organelle that holds water, food and organisms. Can also store waste products until removed. Nucleus. These structures are located inside of a cells. Parasitism. A relationship between two organisms of different species where one benefits and the other is harmed. What does the Golgi apparatus do? Processes, warehouses and ships products. Concentration. A measurement of how much solute exists within a certain volume of solvent. Heterotrophs. Organisms that depend on other organisms for their food. Golgi apparatus. Packages proteins from the and materials and sends them to other parts of the cell. Cytosol. Part of cytoplasm not held by an organelle. Endoplasmic reticulum. An organelle composed of an extensive network of folded membranes that performs several tasks within a cell. Homeostasis. Balancing human or any living organisms. Herbivores. Organisms that eat only plants. Scientific law. A theory that has been tested by and is consistent with generations of data. Isotonic solution. A solution in which the concentration of solutes is essentially equal to that of the cell which resides in a solution. Mutation. A change in the DNA of a gene. Asexual reproduction. Reproduction accomplished by a single organism. Catabolism. The sum total of all processes in an organism which break down chemicals to produce energy and simple chemical building blocks. Isotonic solution. The same concentration of dissolved substances. Water in equal water out. Osmosis. The tendency of a solvent to travel across a semi-permeable membrane into areas of higher solute concentration. Nucleus. What organelle functions to isolate a human cell's chromosomes from the cytoplasm? Multicellular. Made of many cells. Evolution. The process of change that has transformed life on Earth. The change in shape or organisms over time. Example, a child's blank is very fast. The change in shape or organisms over time. Example, a child's blank is very fast. Interdependence. Organisms in a biological community live and interact with other organisms. Pinocytic vesicle. Vesicle formed at the plasma membrane to allow the absorption of large molecules. Exponential growth. Population growth that is unhindered because of the abundance of resources for an ever-increasing population. Plasma membrane forms a flexible boundary between the living cell and its surroundings, made of phospholipids. Reproduction. Process by which organisms produce new organisms of their own kind. Chromatin. Clusters of DNA, RNA, and proteins in the nucleus of a cell. Control variable. Variables that remain constant or unchanged. Golgi bodies. The organelles where proteins and lipids are stored and then modified to suit the needs of the cell. Cytoplasm. The thick fluid region of a cell inside the membrane or next to the nucleus.